Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on identity is the core of cybersecurity. It's all about IGA. Thanks for making it up, making to the event. There's been a big response to this, much more than what is expected. We have 4 IGA specialists with us who are very renowned in their practice. They've got great amount of Middle East expertise and they've executed projects across the world. So any questions or any doubts you have about IGA, this is the best place to ask those questions. So we did this 8 series of webinars for the Cybersecurity Thought Olympics. We covered different aspects like privacy, InfoSec governance, and so on. So all these things were covered during the session, and you have recordings of all of these on our website. And if you want, we can share the links with you. The next slide, please. Basically, I wanted to introduce our experts today. We have Khalil. He has about 18 years in IT security, and he's really the champion of IGA. And then we have Zoni, who's got 8+ years in cybersecurity, and he has deep experience in IAM solutions, and he has executed more than 40 to 50 projects in IGA. And really, both of them are on this panel because they've got a huge amount of Middle East experience. The next slide, please. We also have Rahul. Rahul is the head of identity access management, and he has a good combination of marketing as well as hardcore experience in cybersecurity. Over to you, Khalil and Mohammed. Please take it up.
Okay, thank you, and thank you actually for giving us this opportunity to be able to actually talk to this audience. Obviously, identity and IGA in specific are huge topics, and I believe, as Mukund mentioned earlier, we've done a few slides or a few reviews and revisions of the slides in an attempt to really try to put a decent content for you that is to be covered in 1 hour. That was actually the challenge because it's a huge topic. There are plenty of things that we wanted to share with you, but we were, of course, limited with the time. So we've tried to squeeze in as much as we could in order to touch base with you in this specific hour. We'll try to explain why identity is important. We'll try to touch base, as you can see on the agenda, why IGA really matters, the difference between IGA and IAM, what are the best practices that you need to take in consideration, and what are the common mistakes that companies basically fall into when implementing an IGA solution. And then we're going to go into a case study, and then we will open it up for questions. So without further ado, let's move in. Actually, the first part of our presentation is we're going to be basically talking about why identity in specific is a core topic within security. And we're going to be explaining and understanding the IGA and IAM. So we do hear a lot that identity is the most consequential attack vector. And I'm sure all of you have heard this statement before. But I think we really need to understand why it is the most consequential attack vector and what that really means. So moving to the next slide, I actually can emphasize on the fact that there are lots of researches and statistics that are showing that the cyber threats that are targeting identities are actually increasing. So over the past 3 years, for example, between the years 2020 to 2024, around 60 to 80% of attacks involve human factor, with the stolen credentials and compromised identities being the highest percentage. Obviously, from a technical perspective, the businesses are growing, and accordingly, the identity entitlements are growing as well. And the identity silos are basically becoming more difficult to manage and control. And because of that, the bad actors actually will target that, and it is always difficult to actually discover them. Think of any organization. You will find that almost every person within that organization has some sort of access to the systems and also to the internet. The more people you have, the more chances the people will do mistake. Obviously, we're not talking about the people within the IT domain or within the security domain, but we're talking about the mass audience, the mass employees, the mass staff, which could be internal resources or could be external resources that are using those systems. Again, I just want to emphasize that the identity risk is growing, and addressing the identity risk is becoming more and more necessity for the organizations. We within RSA are really working toward providing a unified identity platform solution that should be covering both the IAM and the IGA space.
Great.
All right.
Khalid,
Yes.
just this is interesting.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, polls have opened, and the first poll is that it says that 50% of the IT security team is by and large responsible for IAM, right? And then other 24% of the customers have specialist identity team, and IT operations run about 12% of them. Is this the trend that you see world over? Who ideally should be managing the identity in an organization? What is your recommendation?
Okay, interesting point. And actually, we were about to touch base on that in following slides. So in the past, I would say over my past experience, as you know, I've mentioned that I've been running the RSA professional services organization globally. I was seeing that mainly within the Middle East, we were a little bit behind what the rest of the world is doing, but we are actually catching up. We in the past had the identity or IGA programs being run by the IT operation teams. And they were focusing on certain aspects of the IGA, which I will cover in later slides. But nowadays, we are kind of like moving more toward actually being more specialized, and we see more organizations as the maturity grows, we see them having their specific identity and access teams who are basically responsible for managing the identities and dealing with it. Interesting enough, I also had a post on LinkedIn, I think it was like 1 month ago, where I was actually talking about who should be responsible for the identity team in specific. Should that be falling under the CISO, or should that be falling under a different department? So I obviously would recommend that to be under the CISO, because it has to be related to the organization's vision and mission, and specifically around the security aspect and risk aspect of it.
Okay. I'd really like a very short answer to this, but there's a question from a gentleman called Mr. Rashid. He says, which is a bigger threat? Loops in security implementation or in ignorance of people? What, according to you, Khalil, is a larger threat?
Loops in security implementations or ignorance of people? You know, you cannot say which one is more important. The threat is there. And as we say, you are as strong as your weakest point, right? So ignorance of people, of course, like security awareness is absolutely important. And you will always find some knowledge lack somewhere. And even with people having awareness, sometimes they do mistakes, right? Whether it is intentional, well, intentional is not a mistake, but non-intentional mistakes sometimes can be really very expensive and can have a huge impact on an organization. That's why actually when you do have a control over, let's say, the access and the privilege that any identity or any actor within an organization have, you can actually control that risk in a way.
Great. Please continue this.
All right. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is basically the World Economic Forum, for example, in 2023, have showed that identity theft is the top concern of both the cybersecurity leaders and the business leaders. It's also worth mentioning that the World Economic Forum and the Cost of Data Breach report that have highlighted identity theft as the highest time to identify and contain. So basically, it takes around a year to be able to identify and contain a breach that was caused by identity theft. And that's because the having the identity being an entry point for an attack, it takes too much, or it takes longer to detect and contain. And again, it's common sense. The longer the attacker stays within an organization, being undetected, the more impact and the higher the cost of that breach is. Can move to the next slide, please.
One interesting point. I mean, obviously, I just looked at the poll results. We just got a very small percentage of, a very large percentage of people do not have an IGA program in place. I mean, probably, yes, the subsequent slides will probably explore why that is the case, what stops customers from having an IGA plan in place. But just a quick note, if you can make, if there is, maybe if you want to cover it later, it's fine. But the lack of an IGA program, right? How would it, what are the risks of not having something planned as something as important as IGA? What could that mean? If you can just, quickly give a headline and then probably move on, that'd be awesome.
Basically, you have one of, as we've said earlier, you have one of the most consequential attack vectors that you are not addressing and you are not preparing to deal with. So you are basically exposing your company or your organization to a huge risk, which you might not know today because maybe so far you've been lucky and you haven't been attacked. So we will be talking about a few things in later slides. I would rather to build up the, let's say, the discussion points step by step so that we can actually accumulate the knowledge as we proceed.
Sure, please.
So at this point, I think it's really important as well to explain what is the difference between IAM, which is Identity and Access Management, Identity Governance and Administration, IGA. Because we do see that a lot of people in the market, they basically use them as if like they were the same thing. Now, there is a difference, they overlap, but there is a difference that I would love actually to explain. So IAM is primarily focusing on controlling user access to systems and applications or data. IAM in specific, basically, ensures that the right individuals have access to the right resources at the right time. The core components of IAM includes authentication, which verifies users' identity, and authorizations, which determines users' permission. IAM also involves user provisioning, single sign-on, and multi-factor authentication, which adds an extra security layer beyond passwords. So IAM is about managing the daily operations related to user identities and access rights, and often involve real-time processing to grant or deny access. On the other hand, IGA focuses on governance and compliance. IGA ensures that IAM practices are IGA ensures that the IAM practices complies with internal policies, the industry regulations, and legal requirements. IGA provides oversights and management of the entire identity lifecycle. So the core components of IGA includes the identity lifecycle management, the access reviews, role management, policy enforcements, and audit and reporting. IGA involves the periodic reviews and certification processes to ensure compliance, and it also has a strategic focus aiming to align the IAM with the business objectives and regularity requirements. So let me summarize this because I have put too much details, and let me just explain both of them in short. IAM deals with the technical aspects of granting and managing access, while IGA ensures that these practices are governed correctly and comply with the necessary regulations.
So,
right.
Khalil, in short, would it be safe to say something like an IGA and an authentication solution, for example, are two sides of the same coin that they would complement each other? Or do you see areas where an organization would say, I don't need to have an IGA, just use a proper authentication mechanism, or vice versa?
No, you'll have to have both, right? You'll have to have both because, as I said before, IAM, which is the authentication, is basically the technical aspect of granting and managing that access, right? But you also need the IGA, which will also ensure that whatever policies and practices you've put with the IAM solution is actually governed correctly, and that also and those policies complies with the necessary regulations. So you cannot live with one without the other.
Yeah.
You'll have to have both. All right. So moving to the next slide. Here, we're going to be basically on this second part of the presentation today, or the webinar. We're going to be talking about why we need an IGA and when we need that. And of course, what are the, let's say, things that companies usually achieve or try to achieve when having an IGA solution. I think this is a slide that you, Zuhni, would love to present.
Absolutely. Thank you, Khalil. So in essence, we talked about, as Khalil mentioned, that the IGA is all about understanding access rights. Who got this access right? Who got this privilege? Who granted them? When did they get them? Should they still keep them or not? Now, in a lot of organizations, 4 or 5 years ago, you could afford to do this process by using like a pen or paper or a very simplified or even advanced Excel sheet or manual processes. Now, if we take an example at how the business is growing in today's world, so it becomes, you can see how it easily builds up to be a lot more complex. So imagine that you have a scenario where you have a single user, and this user has access to different applications and their day-to-day activities, right? So as you can see on the screen here, we have like around a total of 10 applications. Now, each one of these applications have their set of application roles, right? So if you're using something like Salesforce, are you a Salesforce admin? Are you a salesperson? Are you an engineer or a support employee? So all of these different roles, in turn, each one of them has their set of granular, or what we call base entitlements, right? So now that doesn't become a matter of a question of just managing, let's say, and the account itself, or managing the roles. When you try to have a granular discovery or a granular drill down in each one of these topics, you will end up with hundreds or thousands of base entitlements or role that you need to manage. This is per employee. Now, when you scale this up by team, by department, or even in some situation by branches, it becomes a lot more dynamic environment that simply you need to have a proper process governed. Because if we circle back to the original question that was posed in the Q&A, which is more important, the security or the people or knowledge or education? So this is where there are two sides of the same coin. If you have a proper, let's say, implementation in place or proper technology, but at the end of the day, it's a tool, you don't educate the people on how to properly use it, you're not fully using it to the maximum efficiency. And the other way around, if you have a proper education and people understand what they're supposed to do, but they don't have the tool to allow them the opportunity to do so, and every time they need to do an audit, they need to do a report, they have to drill down into hundreds of reports, hundreds of documents, and consolidate them together, it's still not an effective way. So this is why all of these items that you're managing, when you're managing such a big and dynamic environment, this is where you can have a lot of gaps that attackers can exploit, because this account is not monitored closely. This department, I don't see this as a critical for my business, so I will give it less attention. And this is where attackers live, in these gray areas.
One quick point, guys. This is not limited to a large organization only. These risks that Khalil is highlighting uh, uh, applies to medium and small businesses as well. As a matter of fact, if you do not have an IGA in place, like Mukund said earlier, you may have an opportunity to think about these challenges beforehand and make that implementation much more robust. And that is very important. I just wanted to put that out so that you don't kind of link it just to a large enterprise.
Absolutely. This is definitely not large enterprise, and it is actually impacting everyone. And again, security doesn't have, a separation between large and small. We've seen a lot of like even recent attacks that are actually attacking individuals, like ransomware, where they attack your laptop and they lock it and they ask for some kind of like money to unlock your laptop or your data. So there is no longer that segregation of being large, medium, or small entity. So another actually example of why we need IGA, I actually want to consider the identity lifecycle and how it can span over the years. So when we say identity lifecycle, we always reference that as an identity when somebody joins an organization, and then within that organization, they move from one position or one department to another until they simply eventually leave that organization. So that is like the identity lifecycle. And you will probably hear the term JML, which stands for joiner, mover, leaver, as we progress in that conversation. So considering this scenario here, where you have an identity, like somebody is being onboarded, he's a joiner, then he moves within this organization, getting additional access and privilege to additional systems. And then eventually at some point that identity will basically leave the organization. So it have to be, let's say, terminated as an identity, and you'll have to do the offboarding. Usually usually here, what I would want to focus on is that the most critical step is actually within the account termination or within the offboarding process. Because a lot of organizations, they believe that actually they do it right because they think it is easy. But what happens is where a lot of actually companies fall into that mistakes, they actually do not do it right. And that basically leaves a lot of orphan accounts. And I will come to explaining what orphan accounts in a bit so that everybody is aware with the terms that we're using. So those orphan accounts become actually a point of entry or basically an attack chance for those bad actors. And actually, they end up causing a lot of damage or harm to organizations. We have lots of examples of recent attacks where, unfortunately, big organizations, or actually, as you can see here, or even like there was certain governments like Montenegro, they actually have been breached because of those orphan accounts. To explain what orphan accounts are, so basically orphan accounts are the accounts that you cannot link to a specific identity within the organization. And that's because the main identity basically have been offboarded or have been terminated, and you have loose accounts within certain systems or applications. And that's what we mean by orphan accounts. We can move to the next slide. All right. So on the next slide, here I want to actually talk about the benefits of IGA, and actually what I have seen over the past years, like companies, what they are really after when implementing an IGA solution. So, I'm not bragging about this, but I was one of the lucky people who had the chance to work with, I would say, the global clients that we have, whether they are in North America or Latin America or EMEA or Asia Pacific. And I was able to understand that there are different cultures within those organizations that I work with. And what I mean by different culture is not like different culture based on the nationality or anything like that, but it's more around the different culture within the industry itself. So if you are talking about a banking industry versus a commercial or industrial industry, that's different. Again, if the organization had or operates in a very highly regulated sector or basically country, that also has an impact. If the company itself or the organization have also been impacted in the past with a breach, or they have basically failed some sort of like audits and they had to pay fines, you can see that all of those things leave an impact on the way and the culture that a company operates. So without delay, the most three categories that I have seen within those organizations are basically companies that are after increasing the security posture and reducing risk. There are also the companies that are after maintaining and achieving compliance requirements. And there are companies that are focusing on improving their, let's say, operational efficiency. Let's dig into those in more details in the next slides. So starting with the organizations that are more into the or after the increase of security posture and reducing risk, they actually look at the IGA solution, or basically we from RSA, we provide our solution, which we call it identity governance and lifecycle. They look at it as a tool that basically can give them visibility and view of what they have. So basically they go and work on the advanced dashboards and analytics capabilities, because we always say that the GNL or the IGA solution will simply collect the identity data in the organization and will present it in a meaningful way that will simply allow the decision makers to consume that data and make decisions quickly and more accurately, right? So having those dashboards and having those, let's say, reporting tools is one of the key elements for them. We also mentioned earlier the life cycle, which is the joiner, mover, levers, right? And as you can see from the previous example, when you talk about revoking access of a lever and actually dealing with the orphan accounts, is actually a key element for those companies trying to reduce the risk and improve the security posture. You can also think of another scenario here, which is really important because many people do not really pay attention to it, is you have certain individuals within an organization that have been in a company for, let's say, 10 years, 15 years, and 20 years. Basically, some people have all of their career in a single company. And within that company, they have been moving from one position to another. And over the years, they have been accumulating, access and privilege to certain systems. And some of those privileges that they have are no longer required or relevant to the new job or the new role that they are in. You can imagine what happens if somebody who has all of those accumulated access over the years simply, in a way or another, his identity got compromised, or somebody was able to get access to the access they have. So you can imagine the damage that might happen, and how that will impact the let's say the company, and how that will also increase the cost of that breach.
So Khalil, on your point, so that would basically mean that the identity lifecycle is, in essence, is not very related to the size of the organization. So even like a small or medium-sized business, if they have a very dynamic infrastructure, so what if we're talking about something like in the medical sector, where the on-call doctor has to change department or change, let's say, their responsibility throughout the day, and accordingly, their access rights should adapt to that. So would it be safe to assume that you can have a small, medium-sized business in terms of the scalability, but still have a very complex or dynamic identity infrastructure that requires such a solution to always mitigate this risk?
100%, 100%, of course. Right. The last element here with is basically the role management, and what we mean by role management, or you might find people refer to it as business role management, is basically you can allow certain organization to link certain access to some sort of like a business role. So for instance, in your example, you've mentioned let's say a small hospital or a small clinic. There might be a doctor, there might be a nurse, there might be different roles. Each individual might have certain access that is tied to that specific role. Obviously, when you have an IGA solution, you can easily spot if there is like some sort of some sort of, let's say, unmatching between an access that a doctor should have or should not have, when you compare that to what basically their role should be allowing them to have. That's an example of things, and you can of course put that on a larger scale. The more the bigger the organization, the more roles they have, the more complex this becomes, and the more complex it becomes basically to spot those let's say unusual access that have been given or granted to certain individuals. So the IGA solution overall will help the organizations in improving their security posture and reducing the risk by addressing those elements. So,
all right.
Yeah, please.
Khalil, okay, so the poll is now interesting. It's right up between 44% of the people saying that increasing security and reducing risk is the most important benefit of IGA. The second set of people are again arguing that compliance is the best bet for IGA, and operational efficiency is another 11% of that's the poll answer. So are you kind of surprised about the result, or is this along the expected lines? What are your top line expert comments on the reaction to this question?
Actually, this is, I would say, this is a surprise, but it's a happy surprise. I'm happy with those results for a reason. And the reason, as I was saying, based on my experience in the past, I have seen most of the clients in, let's say, in the West, whether it's the US or in Europe, are more focused on the security aspect and the risk aspect and the compliance aspect. While most of the previous engagements we've had in the Middle East in specific was much more focused on improving, let's say, the operational part of it. And as I've said, my belief is we're catching up, right, with the rest. I mean, I'm based in Saudi Arabia, and probably the people in Saudi Arabia will understand that. I have been receiving recently a lot of like SMS messages on my phone from a lot of like let's say shops here in Saudi Arabia that I've been working with as a client, where they are actually sending me SMS messages saying we are updating our privacy policy, user rights, regulations. So please click here to go and accept the new regulations, etc., etc. So it seems that the regulations are actually being pushed more and more in the Middle East, and I'm sure that the UAE as well is in the same position. And that actually puts, I would say, IGA in the right position, where we're talking about people from the identity and risk and security kind of like taking the lead over actually IT operations as it was in the past. And by the way, I'm not talking about the past like 10 years ago. I'm talking about the past, I would say the past 2 to 3 years. So I see that shift happening. And actually, if you ask me, before this, let's say, before the pull, if I would expect that result, I wouldn't expect that result, but definitely there is an improvement. And the other thing is, I wonder if the pull actually is also impacted by the nature of the audience that we have, because I believe that most of the people within the audience are within the, let's say, IT security kind of like domain. So they understand that, and that's why they look at it from that perspective. But unfortunately, there are other organizations where, as I said before, IT operations is taking the lead on IGA kind of like implementation programs.
Khalil,
But
if I'm
please go ahead.
I've had a similar experience over a period of time. The way IGA is being approached within the organizations have also changed. There was a time when the business case for IGA or IAM was built around operational efficiency and how much money you could save by automating. However, as the risk around IGA is being realized, and it has moved from operational efficiency to be looked as a security and a risk management tool. I'm not very surprised, like you said, pleasantly surprised to some extent. But lately, I have seen the security teams taking a lead on IGA, and I think hence this shift in perspective as well.
Yes. I understand that, and I think we are in sync with that observation. So
It's been some time since customers have asked me to make a business case as to how much IGA would save cost for me. It has been in the domain of how secure I will become. So
Yeah.
I think that's a good change for us.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think, as I said before, we are catching up with the rest of let's say the market, and that's because of the improved actually awareness and also the improved, I would say, regulations and the pushed regulations that the countries are posing on the organizations. So that basically, yeah. Someone was saying something, sorry.
No, we good. Nobody was saying anything,
Okay,
Khalil.
perfect. So I'll move to the next slide. And here actually, this is the other part of the clients, as I've mentioned, which are the clients that work on, I would say, highly regulated industries. And those are usually the most, let's say, mature clients, because they are looking at security posture and improving risk, and they are trying to achieve certain regulatory requirements or compliant requirements, or basically they have achieved that already, but they want to maintain that regulations and that compliance. So those are actually, as I said, those clients are based in highly regulated industries or highly regulated countries, and they have in specific high requirements on auditing and reporting procedures. So they keep doing that all the time. And they have to report to their external auditors and their internal auditors as well, where they need to provide them answers to questions around the identities, around the access. And, this is a time-consuming and really difficult exercise for them. And you can imagine in the past when this is not done on, let's say, using a system, it's done basically by human. You end up having a lot of human errors, a lot of mistakes. It takes a lot of time and effort. And actually, it adds a lot of pressure on the organization, because the people who have to report on those audits, requirements. They also have day-to-day jobs that they have to keep doing. So, you know, you cannot just drop your day-to-day job for a period of, and I know that certain organizations, for example, they would go through their audits in the past for months, right? So it was really a challenging thing for them. Also, as part of that, you know, those companies, they have also to benchmark their, let's say, performance against the policies that they have put in place. So those are companies that, for example, have hired third-party, let's say, consultants to provide them with the best policies, the recommended policies for their, let's say, practices and business. And once you have those policies, you want to make sure that you are implementing those policies, and you want to make sure that you are maintaining those policies. So you have to have that type of like policy management stuff within an IGA solution. And of course, last but not least, is actually the continuation of the access certification. You have regularly to make sure that the people that have access to certain things should actually be having access to that thing. And, you know, you have people join, you have people move, you have people leave. So that is like not something that happens in, let's say, a snapshot once a year. It is an ongoing process that those organizations have to comply with and have to maintain. Okay, the last piece, which we talked about earlier, that in the past, most of the Middle East clients were basically focusing on that, which is basically improving operational efficiency. Most of those clients in the past were looking into ways of doing automation. As I was saying in the past, when this is being led by IT administrators or IT operations, what they have in mind was, how can I automate the provisioning of something, which is creating somebody's, let's say, account or access? How can I actually make that really quickly? How can I have that really ready before somebody starts? And we know, as you know, I'm sure all of you have joined a company at some point, or you've been a manager of a new hired resource. And you can imagine the amount of time that it was wasted in the first couple of weeks, where those new hires, or yourself as a new hire, or you as a manager of a new hire, are trying to sort access to an individual that is joining the company. And of course, you know, when you talk about, other requests, you know, how you actually gonna follow up on approving, let's say, that specific access request, who is in the chain of that approval, where that is stuck, and so on. And then they would also want to look into allowing the individuals basically to do access, let's say, or request access on their own without having much of IT operations being involved. So they are looking at things from those operational aspects, right? And actually, it's not wrong to benefit from an IGA solution in improving the operational efficiency. And actually, there was a client that we've had worked with in the past where they were able to identify the orphan accounts, and they were able to remove the access from the applications. They also were able to revoke access from the movers from the applications they no longer use. And that actually influenced, let's say, their cost, because they were under the impression that they have to have, let's say, 10,000 licenses for application X. But then they found out in reality that, you know what, there are only 2,000 people that are using that application, or we only need 2,000 licenses. We don't need the 10,000 licenses, because all of those extra licenses were either orphan accounts, or people have moved to another department and they no longer use that, let's say, application or that kind of like license. So those are some sort of examples around those operational efficiencies that, you know, we can see, and many organizations do achieve by achieving by implementing an IGA solution. But I think the interesting point that we've mentioned at the beginning is that the focus have really shifted into more of like security and risk oriented approach over operational improvement and operational efficiency approach. Okay, so we can move to the next part, which is the best practices and common mistakes.
Okay, so Khalil, for this section, let me ask you a couple of quick questions. From your experience, having managed the professional service role on a global scale and worked with different organizations in different industries from different cultures, and of course, you've probably seen a lot of classic mistakes where organizations fall into when they're trying to implement an IGA solution. If we're talking about, for example, organization where they have the challenge or the mindset of, like you always say, from trying to implement everything at once, all the use cases, all the applications, all the best practices, and having like a big bang project where it takes months and months. Can you tell us a bit more about this problem and what do you think is the best approach to counter it?
Right. So I think you wanted to use the term that I used before, where they want to go from zero to hero, right?
Yep.
And yeah, right. So let's actually go into making, let's say, high-level stuff first, and then we can dig into that in details, right? So as a recommendation, based on, let's say, what we have seen with the most successful clients when implementing an IGA solution, and that's actually in line with what we as RSA have been recommending, is that first, a phased approach is really a key. The second thing is doing or starting with governance and visibility as the base and the start of that IGA, let's say, implementation, or actually program, I'd like to mention, or journey. And lastly, basically doing some sort of like balanced provisioning, which is the automation and the fulfillment. Those are the main three aspects, which I will actually dig in details in the next slides. If you want to go next, right? So the phased approach, let me actually talk about something that we've seen a lot. We come across a lot of clients in the past where they actually release an RFP. And within that RFP, basically, they want to put like a full-fledged implementation where they say, we want to actually implement an IGA solution. We have 100 applications, and we want to actually do a full-fledged implementation that basically goes with doing governance, doing lifecycle, full automation of, let's say, joiners, movers, and leavers. We want to also do segregation of duties. We want to also implement business role management. We want to do data access governance. And we expect to finish this project in a year. And I'm not joking. Those are things that we see a lot in the market. So we usually try to advise those clients that having a full-fledged implementation, expecting, as I said before, to go from zero to hero, usually will put you under a lot of like problems. And we try to explain that, first of all, you need to consider the project as a journey. Do not think that you will start today and you will finish in 6 months, or you'll start today and you will be done in a year. This is going to be a maturity journey for you on your IGA kind of like program. So we advise that basically you'll have to think of phasing this into steps. You need to deliver, let's say, step 1 or phase 1. You need to digest that, make sure that you've done it right, and then move on to the next step, and so on. And you need to think of like the end vision of where you want to end up. We also advise the clients to actually think and implement like broad but shallow versus deep and narrow. And what I mean by that is, we also receive some other RFPs where there are customers saying, okay, we want to implement IGA, but we want to implement IGA in full-fledged, but we want to start with 5 applications. And then we are going to go to the next 5 applications and 5 applications. And they think by doing that, that they are actually taking a phased approach. But this is, again, another mistake here that we see. When we talk about phased approach, we're not talking about grouping the applications into phases, which is a good thing to do. I'm going to come to that, because you have to prioritize, what applications you need to target and so on. But actually, rather than going rather than going narrow and deep by focusing on 5 applications and do everything, you should be probably looking at doing wide but shallow. So you think of like maybe targeting all of your applications and doing like governance and visibility first. And actually, interesting enough, this approach we've been advocating since actually Avixa started. And for those who knows, Avixa started in 2006. And we within RSA acquired Avixa in 2013. And interesting enough that the same approach that we've been advocating since then was actually a recommendation that came out by Gartner last year. They were basically recommending that this is the best approach. Go with governance first, go with a phased approach, try to go broad and shallow, not deep and narrow. All right? Okay. Going to the next slide, which is basically, I've already touched base on it, on basically doing governance first, and why we actually talk about doing governance first. So when you talk about governance and visibility, they are really tied up together. It's basically like turning the light in a dark room, which basically allows you to see what you are trying to manage. If you don't have that visibility, if you don't know who has access to what, then how would you know where is your risk? How would you know where are the orphan accounts? How would you know about a specific, let's say, identity that has a lot of access to a lot of applications, which might pose you risk? If you don't have that visibility phase, you're simply blind, right? And we do actually recommend that you start with the visibility, get an understanding of what you have, who has access to what type of access they have. That is actually your base. And then actually you need to start on working on cleaning up the duplicates and cleaning up the orphan accounts. Because we know the saying that says rubbish in, rubbish out, right? The visibility and the governance first approach is going to be helping you as an input for the next phases.
Got it. We're short on time, but I'm not going to labor into the details. But I think a lot of the customers have said what you have said first. A lot of them have focused on the fulfillment first, and that they feel is the biggest mistake. And some people said that they didn't have a phased approach, which again is a little contrary to what you said, but a lot of people have agreed with what you said. The fulfillment was focused first, but let's move on.
Yeah. And I think the fulfillment first is really one of the challenges, and I'm gonna come to that why, because the fulfillment usually is the most expensive element, right, in an IGA implementation. It basically have the chance of putting a lot of pressure on the IGA project at the beginning, puts the higher risk, the higher delays, right? And actually, it is one of the common misconception among the clients that the IGA platform needs to deliver end-to-end connector-driven automation or fulfillment, right? And that's actually one of the issues that a lot of clients they do not really get what they want from an IGA solution, or I would say that their IGA implementations are not going to be as successful as they want to have in mind. Even actually, even Gartner, in the report that I've just mentioned, have highlighted that as one of the things that out of, let's say, identity practitioners fall into, which is focusing on the automation or provisioning. You know, we do have a lot of like ITSM solutions out there in the market. For example, you know, I don't want to mention specific product, but if a customer has an ITSM solution that they are using, they can simply use it for automation. And Gartner in specific, actually, they set expectations based on their research that provisioning using connectors should not be more than 15 to 20% of the targeted systems. And the remaining 75 to 85% should be done using the indirect fulfillment. Right? So those are the, let's say, the best practices and recommendations and common mistakes that we see clients fall into in the market. And I think with the remaining part now, I can leave it to Zuhni to take the lead on.
Okay, thank you, Khalid. So we'll try to keep the next part as quick as possible because I know we're a bit short on time. Finally, we wanted to wrap up with all what Khalid was going through from best practice recommendation, classic mistakes into a form of a study case from an actual customer that we have within RSA. So just for the sake of confidentiality and for customer sensitivity, we are, when you see the screenshots and the information that we have, this is from actually, we replace the customer actual data with our own this data in the lab just to make it, because we had to go through an NDA to share this type of information from a customer perspective. But to give a bit of a background, so this is the customer that we're talking about. The profile is for a leading bank within the EMEA region, where they have, and that sort of sector, it's more of a medium to large size scalability. They have around more than 150K users, including 7.5K external users, contractors, third parties, and over 100 plus applications. Right? So their challenges were mainly because they are in the banking sector was about having a constant audit evidence that they needed to provide for both internal regulation within the bank and also from external regulation enforced by the country. Right? Now, having this type of regulation for a banking sector, it has to be provided very quickly and very clearly. And this is where they were a bit struggling due to their, let's say, infrastructure and their ecosystem. They haven't been able to meet the deadlines on time on a regular basis because these type of audits were requested on a quarterly basis, for example. So in this case, they already had some sort of instances where they were unable to meet the compliance regulation on time, right? So it's a matter of getting this data. It's there, but it's scattered around different places, different silos, and we have to consolidate them and present it to the auditor on time. So, and their main blocker on this was that they had a very time-consuming manual process for access reviews. Now, when you're talking about access reviews, this is just taking a look at the existing access and making sure that they're collecting it, they are checking who this access belongs to, they are certifying it, and then finalizing all the different spreadsheets. So you have a manager going through this process with different IT individuals, with different security teams, and then consolidating all of the data for their team members and trying to make this on time. So on average, this process would take them took them around over 84 plus days. Now, when you have a deadline, combine the options factors of a short deadline, a very critical process, and a lot of scattered information, there are bound to be human errors. And this is what led them to, as we mentioned, already failing a compliance audit before. Now, after implementing GNL, and we'll give a quick example on how this was implemented, we helped them enhance on a lot of different fronts, most importantly, improving their security posture. Now, this was done through GNL highlighting and identifying a lot of unnecessary and unused access. And when we're talking about this is the concept of the least privilege. If you don't need it, you shouldn't have it. So the solution was able to detect over 30K orphan accounts without owners, and over 50K plus dormant accounts in Active Directory. So dormant accounts are not being used. So the owner has the account, they never logged for the last 4, 5, 6 months. So this is a very high level security posture risk. And of course, once they had this visibility, this visualization, as Khalil mentioned, governance is key, and having a governance-first approach is essential. They were able to achieve regular compliance using the advanced reporting, advancing dashboards, and cut the efficiency significantly. And this brings us to the final point, improving operational efficiency. So we reduced the time needed from the collection from 84 days to only 1 hour, just collecting and consolidating the data from the different sources. And only the time taken for actually reviewing this data only took 3 days, 3 business days. So you can see here the percentage of the operational efficiency has been massive for them. And a very happy sub result from this enhancement was that they reduced the cost of the license expenditure, because they were paying for a lot of accounts, for a lot of software and licensing that they weren't actually using. So instead of having 500 license on, for example, AS400, you only need 1,000 license. So you're reducing costs on this. Now, how is this done? Essentially, we use GenL that has a built-in risk model and an advanced dashboard to very quickly have the customer tune the engine to their business priorities, to their processes. From their perspective, it was orphan accounts and dormant accounts. These were the 2 items that they always needed to provide as part of their audit requirements. So as soon as we tuned these 2 objects to have the highest weight in the risk model, and then we, as a best practice recommendation from our side, we also recommended to have a higher weight on the reviews, because the reviews, this is the constant process to clean up the excessive access. And as soon as we put the required weights and ran the engine, we can see, as you see on the screen in front of you, the chart on the left side. This is a Sankey model, and it's a very easy way to represent data. Basically, on the right side of this chart, the bigger the value, the bigger the line. So essentially, as soon as we kicked the engine, they could easily see that, as they are expecting, they have a lot of orphan accounts, they have a lot of unused accounts, and they have a lot of reviews that are not done on time. And once, because this is a dynamic dashboard that provides data in real time, once you click on any of these 3 topics, you will get more data into the actual risk topic. In our case, when taking into consideration, for example, dormant accounts, once we clicked on it, the system was able to isolate where do these dormant accounts live. And this is where we discovered all of the dormant accounts basically live in Active Directory. This is their one of their main points. They have a lot of AD accounts that are not being used, a lot of groups that are not being accessed. The next step was drilling a bit deeper into this. So this is where we start to have a drill down reports to start to get a list of all of these dormant accounts. Which one of them have not been used for over 60 days? Which one of them have been used between 30 to 60 days? And then we can do a group filtering to see if these accounts fall under users in the same department, under a same AD group, or under the same date. So they all were provisioned on the same date, but they haven't been used since then. It could have been just a massive onboarding that happened incorrectly. And just as a quick example, you see here one of the, sorry, let me see. You see here the user before last. And for example, Chris Williams, this is one of the users that we saw popped out. When we wanted to do a more, to try to correlate what was the source of this, this is when we started leveraging access reviews. Now, our access reviews leverages analytics and AI, in a sense that you see on the panel on the left side in the screenshot, there is analysis and guidance tab that provides a lot of different filters, a lot of different categories for reviewers to start to assess which ones do I want to start with, because these are the ones that are more critical for my business. So I have a lot of items to review and a short time to get this done. I need to start, for example, with the items that are causing violations. Once I'm done with this batch, I go to the second one, which could be, for example, never reviewed items. Now, in this bank specific case, it was the uncommon access. So this is not something that we are defining for the system. This is where GenL is actually drilling into the access rights of all of the teams are reporting to the same manager. And based on a threshold that we set, searches for the access that is not shared across the whole team. And this is presented in the uncommon access. So as soon as we saw the uncommon access, we saw that one of the users that have dormant access, this is because it's an uncommon access. So it's dormant because he's not using it, because the rest of his team doesn't even have the same access on this AD group, which made sense. So now we are correlating from different places. The dashboard started by showing where are the uncommon access, where are the unused access. And then when we did the review, and we saw that this unused access is also part of an uncommon access, which now is completing the picture. And the final step afterwards, okay, how do we amend this? How do we mitigate this? So this is where we started to use the lifecycle aspect of the solution, as Khalil mentioned, having compliance, having policies, where we start to put policies in place so that if a dormant account has been detected by the system, then automatically we would alert the rule owner, which is part of the InfoSec team, and then we would have an access rule that's provisioned automatically run to for the moment disable this access, and then we can generate a report that is sent to the appropriate manager that these employees report to you and they have a lot of access that have not been used. Can you please review this access and make sure that do you still need to keep it or not? So the mitigation was a two-part. First, immediately disable the access so it's not being used maliciously by an attacker. And the second part is mitigate it, where we are now doing reports, we're leveraging reviews to try to see should they still need this access? If not, let's remove it. And then we are eliminating, freeing up unnecessary access. We are making the profile a little more cleaner. And also at the same time, we are reducing costs of having this type of excessive access. So these were the 4 steps or the 4 phases, not steps because steps make it a lot more simpler than it is. But these were the 4 phases that we went through with this customer to address their issues with unused and dormant accounts. Again, there's a lot of different success stories, a lot of different tales from the field, and this is let's say the exciting part about an IGA solution. What works for one industry, for one organization, will not necessarily work exactly the same. There's no silver bullet. Each organization have their own business requirements, their own business needs, their own, let's say, challenges they want to overcome. And this is where having a proper IGA project, a proper IGA implementation and methodology can help you highlight these challenges and address them in the order that you see are most critical for your business. With that, this was the last part, and I'd like to hand over back to for Q&A, if any.
Hey guys, thank you so much. I know we got a little more excited and we overran by about 10 minutes, but you've been such a patient and a wonderful audience today. We are, of course, going to be there for another minute or two to see if you have any questions. You can reach out to us and we will just put in our email ID. We'll be happy to take you through a demonstration or a question and answer session. Or if you want to talk to us in detail about anything, we would be happy to do that as well. I'm just pasting my email address on the chat. Please write back to me, and then we can take the discussion forward in any way you feel fit. We have, of course, the expertise of Kusai, Rahul, Khalil, and Khaliz, and then Mohammad Zoni with us. So thanks again. You've been such a wonderful audience. Any question, guys? We will close in the next 30 seconds. Thank you, everybody, for your time. We will get back to you pretty soon, and you can also reach out to us if we have any questions.